Good evening, everyone. If you're not aware of already, or if you follow me on Twitter or join the Discord, um, then you'll know I'm definitely a big fan of the Sega Genesis. That is one of my favorite systems of all time. I think it's only beaten out by the NES and maybe in certain times of the year the Intellivision. But in terms of 16-bit consoles, I just love the Sega Genesis. I like it more than the Super Nintendo. I haven't played the TurboGrafx 16, but I think it's definitely Sega's best console that I've played. One thing I don't mention very often, besides that Columns review, was the Sega Master System. Yeah, Sega's predecessor. This was a very underwhelming system for me. I purchased it in the new year. I was like, new year, new system. New year, new me. I'm not gonna spend a ton of money. Goes out and buys a Sega Master System. That kind of shit, you know? So, yeah, the Sega Master System, it's definitely not one of my favorites. I've tried collecting for it, and over time, I have about 15 games for it. Over time, I've built up a few games that I actually really like, and I think there's some games that if you're starting to build a Sega Master System collection, these are just ones that you should pick up. So yeah, that's the topic of today's video. Sega Master System games to start off your collection. Sounds interesting, right? Yeah, it kind of is if you're interested in Sega Master System. One thing I did want to mention about the Sega Master System is that fucking sound. I know the Atari 7800 produces worse sound, though that's just fucking abysmal. But the Sega Master System also isn't very great. It sounds like what a conspiracy theorist would say when the government is in their town emitting this medium frequency white noise. It's terrible. It's not a very good thing to listen to. But other than that, the system in terms of tech specs, it's fine. So I just wanted to mention that before we get started. Anyway, we're going to start out this list with arguably the area that Sega Master System beat the NES, and that's the arcade port of Double Dragon. And everything else, the NES just kicks the Master System's ass. I'm sorry, that might be offensive. I'm just a big Nintendo guy, so the Sega Master System actually had some very good arcade ports or third-party titles that did come out on both systems. And Double Dragon is a pretty good example of that. It's actually a pretty fine beat 'em up. It's not great. I think it's a little bit unpolished, but that's basically what Double Dragon was. I definitely think, just because of the two-player option, that it's better than the NES version. And you also don't get that platforming garbage with zero continues. That's just bullshit. So, Sega Master System, Double Dragon, it's pretty relaxed game, pretty decent beat 'em up, repetitive, but definitely one worth checking out if you are building up a Sega Master System collection. I've already talked about Columns. I know I gave it a little bit of shit, but if you're not comparing it to Tetris, it's still a fine game. So I did give a more detailed review when I did start to get back into YouTube. It was my first video I relaunched this channel with. I'll link it. It's not perfect, but I did explain why I just don't think it's all that great. But if you're starting out, it's a pretty cheap game. It's not super expensive, and well, it's a puzzle game. So if you like puzzle games, it's something you just pick up and play. And when you're done, you go play Tetris. Alright, usually when I make these kinds of videos, I like to keep it kind of cheap. Because after all, you know, when you're first starting out, you don't want to go all out with like the $50 games before you even know you'll like the system. But I do have to drop that ball a little bit and talk about R-Type, which is by far, well maybe not by far, but one of my favorite Master System games. This is a shooter, shoot 'em up or shmup, I don't know what the hell to call it, but I'm usually not a big fan of these games. I like River Raid. If you're including run and gun games, you know, the Contra games I also like, but usually in terms of shmups, I don't play them very often. I'm really bad at them, and they're quite difficult, so they're a little bit hard for me to get into. But R-Type was, I don't know, it just feels more newcomer friendly than something like Gradius, and let me explain that. Gradius might not be necessarily harder than R-Type, but R-Type constantly gives you weapons, and also you're not entirely screwed if you don't have a weapon, and well, if you are, then there's definitely opportunities to get weapons, and then you'll get lasers and all sorts of different stuff like that, and that's pretty fun. Where in Gradius, I'll play it for a little bit, there's that section with the volcano, and I just get fucking wiped from this planet and give up. So, R-Type, it was something I could get into. It's quite a fun one, obviously. No shit. But yeah, if you like shmups, I'd say this is a must-play. One of the best shoot-em-ups of the third generation, by far. Racing games, another genre that really just didn't hit it for me this generation. But there were a few. One of them is Outrun, which is an arcade driving game, which is what I mean by saying I wasn't a huge fan of racing games from this era. But Outrun is a little bit different. Maybe it's because it's slightly easier than something like Rad Racer, or maybe it's just because there's different changes of scenery and multiple paths, and it feels almost immersive. I just kind of like this game, you know, it's charming. It's not the best game. After all, it's an arcade driving game, and I usually don't like those. But I think it's fun in its own right. Just an interesting piece of history to check out with a little bit of fun gameplay in there. Outrun, it's pretty cheap. I recommend it. Also, in terms of racing games, there's Enduro Racer, which, in terms of racing games on the Sega Master System, this just beats Outrun in every way. You know why? Because it's not an arcade driving game. It's an overhead game like RC Pro-Am, but not quite like RC Pro-Am. You aren't racing specifically other people. You are just trying to get to the finish line before the time limit. But I think there's just it's just easier to pick up and play. You don't get blindsided by some random hill or like a car that you didn't see coming in an arcade driving game. It's just a simple arcade game. Although, if you want to play the game, there's a trick where if you're going up a ramp, you just quickly do a wheelie right before then and release it at a certain time. You'll have to look at the manual to get more specific details on that. Yeah, you don't lose speed when you hit the ground, so that's an important thing to note. But there's 10 levels in the game, 5 levels with different scenery, and I also heard the Japanese version has way more levels, so if you have an emulator or you like using emulators, the Japanese version is also a very good version, although the North American one is also fine as well. Alright, next up is Choplifter. This is one of the cheapest games that you can get on the Sega Master System, and, well, yeah, it's quite worth it to pick up. It also came out on the 7800, and I just can't fucking stand that version. Like, you'll be picking up some passengers on your helicopter in the 7800 version, and then all of a sudden this plane comes out of nowhere. You can't even fucking react, and it drops a bomb on you, and you're dead. So are the passengers, too. So, not a big fan of the 7800 version, but luckily that doesn't really happen very often in the Master System version. It still is very difficult with 0 continues and 3 lives, but I think it's fun just to play every once in a while, see how far you can get. If you're trying to beat it, good luck. But I think it has good gameplay, so that beats out it being overly hard, in my opinion. Alright, so if you liked Kung Fu on NES, well, Black Belt is even better. Not only do your enemies explode into chunks, but also you can pick up power-ups and also fight these one-on-one Street Fighter style bosses at the end, which are kind of controversial. Some people really just don't like them. Maybe it's because it's a Street Fighter style, and maybe there's no Hadoukens or Shoryuken up your asshole. Maybe that's why people don't like it. But I think they're fine. But yeah, I think Black Belt is pretty fun. Again, it's pretty difficult, but not like overly hard. So I definitely recommend that. It's also one of the cheapest Master System games, and well, it's easy to pick up and play. So there's that too. Well, that's about it in terms of games to start your Master System collection. I'm not super familiar with the Master System quite yet, but I have picked up quite a few of the common ones, or at least the cheapest ones that you can find. But I wouldn't call myself a big Master System fan. I just think that these are some of the games that I personally enjoyed. Some people will be like, why the fuck did you not mention Shinobi? I'm gonna fucking kill you. Yeah, the reason I didn't mention Shinobi is because I don't own it. And, I mean, I'm not super convinced to go out and buy it yet. There's also some other games that you're probably wishing I mentioned, but yeah, I don't own them, so sorry. Anyway, that's it. If you're interested in checking out the Master System, those are my picks. Anyway, yeah. See ya.